what does Pakistan do in that kind of scenario? Is a NATO from the Islamic world completely preposterous and we shouldn't bother focusing on that and just focus on the domestic situation within Pakistan and how that maybe affects its ability to operate externally or in this sort of context? About the idea of an Islamic NATO, that, attack on one of us is an attack on all. Mainly what they see as the belligerency of Israel and by extension, therefore, the Trump administration.
If it seems like there's this good chance that the Gaza war is quieting down, hopefully, and that there's talk of countries, including Saudi Arabia, thinking about dramatically changing the nature of their relations with Israel, that would appear to militate against the idea. Ultimately, I don't know. I mean, Pakistan is always looking for new friends. And it does have a fair number of friends, more than many would give it credit for having. So I think that in principle, it would be interested.
This is The Global Gambit.
Welcome back, everyone, to part 2, where I'm speaking with Michael Kugelman, a writer of Foreign Policy's weekly Southern Asian brief and all-round expert of Pakistan, but also Afghanistan and the broader Southern Asian or Indian subcontinent, as I know some of my audience likes to call it. And Michael, we had a very interesting first part. The second part, a month ago, we had quite remarkable news about a new strategic partnership between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Now, in some people's eyes, this is, it's more of an MOU, or the militaries involved aren't that big a deal. I personally think it is a bigger deal because it indicates, the broader shift in geopolitical trends and multipolarity or multipolar world. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I'd love to know your immediate reactions to this when you saw it, and then we can begin to break apart it in more detail.
Well, actually, I think this is a very big deal, especially because this is actually more than a strategic partnership. And we're talking about a mutual defense pact, right? This is something that's even deeper than an alliance. This is the closest form of defense partnership that two countries can have, where essentially each side pledges to come to the other's defense if one is attacked by a third party. So it's remarkable. And, I think that it's quite clear that for many years, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have had a close alliance, including a military partnership. But this deal, this mutual defense pact, really consolidates and formalizes this deep alliance. And it's significant for a number of other reasons. One is that it formally embeds Pakistan in the security architecture of the Middle East, a region that is very important for Pakistan's interest, a region where Pakistan has many close friends, all of the GCC states, plus a number of others. This is important, and the geopolitical moment as well. I mean, given everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, it's a notable time for Pakistan to be signing on to this mutual defense pact with one of the most powerful actors in the Middle East. So it's a big deal, and I think that it certainly has very interesting implications for India as well. And I say that because India itself has a close relationship with Saudi Arabia, one that's grown in recent years since India stopped importing oil from Iran because of U.S. sanctions risk. It really ramped up its energy partnership with Saudi Arabia, and that strengthened the partnership on the whole. So now India has to confront the reality that one of its closest partners in the Middle East now has a mutual defense pact with Pakistan, India's enemy. The other issue here gets into the India-Pakistan dynamic, right? The mutual defense pact is about coming to defense of your ally when it's attacked by another country. If there's one country that's likely to attack Pakistan anytime in the future, it's India, right? So I do not think at all that if India were to carry out military strikes in Pakistan, that Saudi Arabia would retaliate militarily against India. That would not happen. Saudi Arabia and India have a very close relationship. I do not think this mutual defense pact would deter India from carrying out strikes in Pakistan if it was contemplating doing that. But I do think it's notable that it's something that India has to consider, right? That it likely concludes that, or I don't want to say it likely concludes, just knowing that this deal is sort of there, that context, I think, we'll have to figure in the calculus that India uses as it considers in a potential conflict scenario what it might do in Pakistan. I suspect that if India were to carry out strikes in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia would be much more robust and assertive about trying to get India to scale back any type of military action compared to in the past. So the India factor looms large here as well. Even though, I'm a South Asia specialist, so I always look at things through a South Asia lens, I do think that this Pakistan-Saudi Arabia pact was driven more by geopolitical and security considerations in the Middle East than it was in South Asia. And here I'm specifically talking about the the Israeli strikes on the Hamas leadership in Qatar. I think that was one of the final triggers for finalizing a deal that might have been in the works for quite some time. But yeah, I think it's a game changer. I'm happy to use a term as strong as that.
We have sentiment feelings about game changer on the channel, but no, I certainly do think it's a big deal, which is why I covered it myself. And if people aren't sure what a defense pact is versus an alliance or strategic partnership or something, then people can find another video which I made exactly about that, and it's worth checking out. But Michael, just to challenge you a bit more on the India element, because if you have partially answered it, but if Saudi Arabia is not going to do anything when India's, striking Pakistan, what's the point of this? Why does it matter then? And okay, calculus, but what, India will maybe not continue striking into Pakistan for as many days as it did, say, as in May? Is that sort of the main crux that you think would be different?
No, I mean, again, as I said before, I think that this is a lot more about considerations in the Middle East than it is about South Asia or India. I really think it comes down to Saudi concerns about what Israel has done in recent weeks, particularly its strikes in Qatar, and looking to essentially diversify its security partners to ensure that it has the protection or the support that it needs in a very troubled region, to put it mildly. And there's also the nuclear factor, and this gets into some somewhat speculative grounds. I don't want to say too much about this, but there's been some discussion that Pakistan has essentially been willing to extend its nuclear deterrent capacity, or not extend it, but some speculation that the fact that Pakistan has nuclear weapons is relevant for this deal, in the sense that Pakistan is joining this alliance or this defense pact with Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan not only has a very strong, able military, but it also has nuclear weapons, and I think that's significant. Pakistan, of course, being the only Muslim Muslim majority state to have nuclear weapons at the moment. I think that's something that we have to think about in this context as well. It's not just another military alliance in that sense, but Saudi Arabia is forming a mutual defense pact with a nuclear armed state. That's pretty significant too.
No, for sure. I mean, you kind of stole the moment I was going to ask you about. What isn't this just about nukes now? But for sure, I think that is an element. But I find it hard to believe that the Pakistanis would be willing to share such intelligence and information with the Saudis to develop a weapon. Also because they lose that leverage then, and I don't think the Americans would be exactly okay with that. But maybe the Americans don't have any say in this. So what else is Saudi Arabia able to get from this then? Is it? I'm aware that Pakistani military has been training the Saudi Arabian military in certain ways. Is that true? Is that an element here, or it's not that sort of complex?
Yeah, I mean, to clarify, I'm not at all suggesting that Pakistan would be sharing nuclear secrets or anything like that to help Saudi Arabia develop a bomb or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm talking more about the symbolic importance of a nuclear state from the Muslim world joining in this pact with Saudi Arabia. But to your question, I think there's a number of things that Saudi Arabia will be looking to get. One is a willingness of Pakistan to provide troops to help Saudi Arabia in various contingencies. The way things are moving now in light of the ceasefire in Gaza, the possibility of Saudi Arabia looking for friendly countries, especially those that it's especially close to provide troops to participate in some type of peacekeeping mission or something like that. If times were different, I would say that maybe Saudi Arabia would look to help Pakistan, or sorry, Saudi Arabia would want Pakistan to be prepared to help Saudi Arabia in any type of contingency regarding Iran. Now, of course, tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran have reduced significantly. There was a rapprochement deal signed by the Saudis and the Iranians a few years ago, mediated by China. Pakistan likes to project itself as a neutral in the Saudi-Iranian dispute. We don't have to worry about this quite as much now, but you can't disregard the Iran factor here. But one other thing I'd say, a mutual defense pact, you think about military cooperation and all that. Think about the geopolitical stuff here as well. There's a lot of buzz that if things really stay calm in the Middle East and the war doesn't resume in Gaza, that Saudi Arabia might be amenable to be pressured by the Trump administration to join the Abraham Accords and recognize Israel along with several other countries in the region. The Saudis, I think, would want to leverage this pact with Pakistan. And if they're comfortable with doing it, they'd want to basically ask Pakistan to join the Abraham Accords as well, which would go completely against Pakistan's longstanding policy on Israel, which has been to essentially categorically refuse to recognize Israel until there's a Palestinian state. Things could get a bit awkward for Pakistan as well from this pact.
For sure. So, on that, then, what do you see as the main uncertainties in the Pact's more implementation? Which areas would there be a potential actual response, a kinetic response, if there was land incursions, sea, air, more maybe cyber? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know because there's been very little that's been made public about what exactly is in this deal, right? There have been statements, but given how sensitive it is, it's, there hasn't been much put out there in the public. So I myself am not exactly clear what exactly Pakistan might be willing to do. I mean, you're right. If you talk about something like a cyber attack, well, that's serious, but it may be easier for Pakistan to help, but how would Pakistan help? What type of capacities does it have to assist in that regard? I really don't know. So this is something that I think we need to wait until we have a better sense as to what exactly this pact actually stipulates. What does it expect of Pakistan? What does it expect of Saudi Arabia? And what would be the factors that would guide those considerations?
Well, why hasn't there been more information shared at this point? Is it more about the symbolism behind it and sort of seeing how other countries in the region react, whilst we're waiting for the situation in Gaza to stabilize? What can we expect to see, do you think, as more time passes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it could also be the political cultures of the two countries. They're not known for being terribly transparent when it comes to these types of things, and they might just feel better keeping stuff out of the public eye. Though honestly, I would think that there's something to be said for releasing something, not necessarily the primary source of the text of the pact if it exists, but just to put something out there to reduce the speculation and the conspiracy theories and all of that. And it's just a lot of questions as to what really is
Yeah. And then obviously this pact, we've touched upon it, but I do want to get to the nuts and bolts more. The overall security architecture of the Middle East is, as you said, it's a troubled region, but we are seeing huge balance of power shifts. The sort of potency of the Islamic Republic in Iran doesn't, well, it's been revealed to be to some paper tiger, but it's still quite capable. Proxy networks are not as there anymore. But obviously, there's also been this land border challenge between Iran and Pakistan over the Balochis. So, how does this pact, or just generally the security architecture, change and evolve from here?
Yeah, and that I think also remains to be seen. And again, I mean, I go back to what I said before, and it's hard for me to elaborate because I'm not a specialist on the Middle East. But I really think that the main determinants of this pact and its trajectory will be driven by events in the Middle East, not in South Asia, not in in Pakistan, but not in India and in South Asia, broadly speaking. No, I think that the Saudis are hedging, or not hedging. I think that they are hedging. They'd like to hope that things will calm down in terms of war and conflict in the Middle East, but I think they're also trying to prepare for the possibility that there could be future flare-ups, and they want to be sure that they could have a close friend that they could depend on when they're in a pinch and when they need assistance. And what that might entail, who really knows? Now, for Pakistan's sake, I think that Pakistan will have to hope that the Saudi relationship with Iran does not get worse, because that could then put Pakistan in a more difficult spot. If Saudi Arabia starts worrying about things that Iran could do to harm it, if it's concerned about Iranian proxies that could pose threats to Saudi Arabia, it might look to Pakistan to help with that. And I don't think that Pakistan would have an interest in that. But when you sign on to a mutual defense pact, I think you have limited leverage to back away from these types of things. But again, I think, from my perspective, it's a bit too early to be weighing in on these types of considerations because there's still just a lot that we don't know about this pact. I don't want to say it's mysterious. There's been plenty of statements from both governments about it and so on. There's just still a lot about it that we don't know.
Sure. I mean, okay, putting it more in the reality of the situation for Pakistan. One of the things that I think has been quite interesting is the idea of a Islamic NATO. Now, obviously, there is a bit of speculation there. So, sorry, Michael, I'm going to still ask you to be slightly speculative. But, like, what does Pakistan do in that kind of scenario? Is a NATO from the Islamic world completely preposterous and we shouldn't bother focusing on that and just focus on the domestic situation within Pakistan and how that maybe affects its ability to operate externally or through in this sort of context?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by an Islamic NATO. I mean, are you thinking of a military alliance involving Pakistan and other countries in the Muslim world, the Saudis and others? I'm trying to get a sense as to what you mean by that.
Yeah, there's been plenty of discussion amongst
Yeah.
certain political circles about the idea of an Islamic NATO. The idea that some of the more
Hmm.
powerful regional countries, including possibly Turkey, would
Right.
be more officializing their idea of collective deterrence. That,
Hmm.
attack on one of us is an attack on all. Mainly what they see as the belligerency of Israel and by
Right.
extension, therefore, the Trump administration.
I mean, yeah, no, it's a good point, but honestly, I think that if it seems like there's this good chance that the Gaza war is quieting down, hopefully, and that there's talk of countries, including Saudi Arabia, thinking about dramatically changing the nature of their relations with Israel, that would appear to militate against the idea of an Islamic. Ultimately, I don't know. I mean, Pakistan is always looking for new friends, and it does have a fair number of friends, more than many would give it credit for having. So I
Mm.
think that in principle, it would be interested in the idea of some type of new collective military alliance that it would involve some of what are already its closest friends. If you're talking about the Saudis or some of the other GCC states, uh, plus Turkey or Malaysia or whatever, what have you. But I think that Pakistan would be cautious at a moment when it is also, as you know, really trying to capitalize on this somewhat unexpected resurgence in ties with the United States. And it's also looking to build up or solidify ties with other countries in the West, like the UK and the EU, that are important trade partners. So I think that Pakistan might be careful about how it chooses to go about this. But again, Pakistan needs friends, and I think it's been trying to diversify its sources of partners, including its security partners. So I guess it all depends on how things are playing out in the Middle East, quite frankly. If things start blowing up again, and if the war resumes and if things get bad again, that would suggest a more a greater inclination, not just in the part of Pakistan, but other countries in the Muslim world to move toward that type of grouping. But I think for now that Pakistan's very happy with this mutual defense pact with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is too, and don't necessarily see that as a stepping stone to something bigger and more multilateral or collective.
Yeah, so my penultimate question is sort of building on that, which is the growing diversification that Pakistan's government seems to have been pursuing, the restoration or improvement of ties with Bangladesh, which was obviously a bit of a concern for New Delhi. As you said, the resurgence in relations with the United States, but of course also the long-standing ties and engagement it has with China, which in itself is becoming a lot more active, shall we say, in the broader Southeast Southern Asian theatre, shall we say, Indo-Pacific. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I think that the Trump administration has been surprisingly fond of Pakistan is that it recognizes that Pakistan has somewhat of a unique status and that it has very close ties with China, with the Arab Gulf states, along with Iran, plus to somewhat of a lesser degree with Russia. And I think and again, its friendships with those countries vary, on level, of course. But I think there's something to be said for that. Yeah, I mean, I think Pakistan has been able to make headway in terms of how it's been able to expand its partnerships. But I don't think we should place too much stock in some of these partnerships. I'd say that for all the positivity and the high level engagements driving the US Pakistan relationship there, I don't necessarily think the long term trajectory of that relationship is any more positive now than it was a year ago, just because there hasn't actually been any substantive collaborations between the two sides. They're just talking about things they might want to do. And then with Bangladesh, there was an opportunity there, right? When Sheikh Hasina was driven out,
Mm.
it then created openings for elements and actors that are much are receptive to partnership with Pakistan, don't want to work with India. But Bangladesh is going to have an election in February. I suspect the next government will try to want to patch up things with India, which might mean not as close ties with Pakistan. They both export garments and textiles, so that doesn't really make them logical trade partners. So I think in some of these cases we don't want to give Pakistan too much credit because some of these partnerships aren't really that big yet. On the whole, given how much India has tried to sideline Pakistan, both in the region and globally, I think that simply is not the case. And Pakistan's participating in these large multilateral military exercises. One of them, I think this happened a few weeks ago, I think, hosted by Pakistan. So, it's present, and it's always going to have its tried and true allies, China, Saudi Arabia, and increasingly Turkey. But to the extent that it can go beyond that, I think that is significant. But again, we shouldn't overstate how much it's been able to diversify its sources of partners just yet.
Fair enough, and that's why I love to hear your perspectives on things, because you remind us to not get too carried away with our interpretations of things. But my last question, Michael, really is, simply what would you emphasize viewers, listeners, people who are interested in this part of the world, in the broader context, or fascinated just specifically on Pakistan for the rest of the year? Anything to look out for? Anything you'll be watching?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot to watch in Pakistan. And I think one thing to watch is the economy. We've seen some pretty notable indications of macroeconomic stabilization in recent months. Inflation's come down, prices have come down, the currency stabilized a bit. I mean, a lot of that is artificial. It's because of new infusions of IMF support. But just 2 years ago, Pakistan was at risk of default. It was at risk of becoming another Sri Lanka. And yet it did not, and it's righted the ship. But I think the question now is, what can Pakistan do to capitalize on that? And there's been this long history in Pakistan of these boom and bust cycles of, economic struggle, economic stress, followed by some degree of stabilization until it all falls apart again. The current government insists that this time they're serious when it comes to reform plans, structural reforms that could finally bring some long-term economic stability to Pakistan. So that's worth watching. I'm not optimistic, quite frankly, but that certainly is something to watch. Beyond that, I'll go back to what we talked about at the beginning, is the security situation. Pakistan does not have an answer for this terrorism problem, cross-border terrorism problem. What more might we see from Pakistan as we get to the end of the year? Will it consider scaling up strikes, counterterrorism strikes, military operations in Afghanistan again? Will it try to handle things just by focusing on the TTP, the militant presence on the Pakistan side of the border? I think that's important to watch too, just from a broader perspective of stability, but also give a better sense as to what the priorities are for the security establishment moving forward.
Very well said. Michael Kugelman, writer of Foreign Policy South Asia Brief. Thank you very much for joining us for this widespread and in-depth conversation. And if you enjoyed it, everyone, then do check out Michael's work. He does fantastic stuff, which is why I was very keen to have him on for these broad array of topics. I think Michael looks pretty questioning at this point. And I'll see you all in the next videos. But take care, everyone. See you soon.